times. But did either of you, so everyone knows there's only two folks here today, either of you wanted to ask a question or make any comments?
Yes, Chris. This son of David, the Messiah, has been argued as the Jews not wanting to recognize Jesus as the Son of God, but a Messiah according to their view of a Redeemer. So is that the case here?
I think the reality is, it doesn't matter how the Lord would do it, is the Old Testament prophecies of what God wants to do mix a whole host of things. When Jesus first arrives on the scene, they say, are you Elijah? Are you the Messiah? Are you the prophet? And all of those are ideas that actually, as Christians, we look in and we see Jesus fulfilling. So the prophet is different from the Messiah in the prophetic stream. That's a shorthand for the prophet who comes after Moses. So there was an expectation of a lawgiver who would come after Moses, and that we were supposed to listen to him. So there would be there was within certain rabbis already conversations about because they've lost the temple now. The temple's there again, but there was a period when they lost the temple, and they had to think about what does it mean if we don't have a temple. So they'd tried to rework out a way of doing Judaism without a temple. And of course, that's happened since the destruction of the Second Temple as well. So the idea of the prophet who's giving a new form of the covenant is an idea. And then the Messiah, the son of David, well, there was a long history of there being two Messiahs. One who's the son of David, and one who's sometimes referred to as son of Joseph, and sometimes they broke it into another, or son of Aaron. That's another one. So there was a Messiah, son of Joseph, i.e. the northern kingdom, Messiah, son of David, and Messiah, son of Aaron, and they all have genuine prophetic statements in the Old Testament that allow you to build that up. So we actually have a document that was found in the Qumran scrolls that refers to these four messianic figures all on one page. And as we look at those things, we actually see them all fulfilled in Jesus, but they're like from different angles. So I think because that's true, you could always then, if you like, come along and say, oh, well, every time it refers to son of David like this, it then excludes these. People can always do that, but I don't think it's supposed to exclude. It's really another aspect of the messiahship. And the most common understanding, and the Messiah that was most anticipated, was the son of David, because he was seen as a military leader, you see. So the Messiah, son of Joseph. I remember sharing this a few years back. Actually, I saw a report by an Orthodox Hasidic Jew, so not a Christian, who actually was making an argument within it was a global gathering of key Jewish leaders who were saying, that we should be able to acknowledge Jesus as the Messiah, son of Joseph, you see. So not the son of David, but he is the son of Joseph, because he definitely did the things that we see of Joseph. He suffers, and he seems to be a defeated Messiah, and all of those verses which we understand in the fullness of Jesus' Messiahship, that he seems to be defeated, but then he's resurrected and he's also the son of David. So, well, we should at least be able to recognize him as someone that was sent by God, and he fulfills those prophecies, you see. So that's a long way of answering your question, Joseph. But I think what I'm saying is, there can always be people that will say, if you look at any one aspect, you're missing the others. But really, the thing is, you want to take the whole counsel, bring it all together. And I think at this point, the fact that in the kind of popular voice, we're hearing, as you get into the Gospels, the phrase "Son of David" popping up more as Jesus comes into Jerusalem, That's them recognizing the kind of clearest, simplest way of contemporary understanding of he's the Messiah we've all been hoping for. What they think the Son of David will do is disappointing for them. For some of them, because for many the Son of David is going to kind of drive out the Romans. But it's an important messianic title, and that's the best way they can express it. So sorry, is that okay? Does that help?
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah.
And of course, when, as you said, a lot of people who look at it from that just one-sided, of the Jews not wanting to recognize him as the Son of God.
Yeah.
Obviously, as you said, they miss the fulfillment of the prophecy.
Yeah, and so that you see in my mind, the divinity of Jesus is in a slightly the divinity of the Messiah does cross over in the Old Testament prophecies. So in particular in Psalm 2, which is a clearly Davidic psalm and clearly is Son of David at the beginning, but as you get nearer the end with to acknowledge the Son, or kiss the Son as we sometimes translate it, starts to kind of push into a slightly more divine approach. Then of course you get the vision in Daniel, which is not necessarily tied to the Son of David, but is a Son of Man who's kind of a strange hybrid of both heavenly and earthly. So there's but what our understanding of Jesus is by bringing all of these things together and saying they were one character. So the expectation, as I say in the Qumran scrolls, is is the son of Aaron, is the Messiah son of Aaron the same as the Messiah son of Joseph, and is that the same as Messiah son of David? And probably they're all different in their mind. And the prophet is a separate character, and in particular the prophet they thought of as their righteous teacher that they'd already gone, and has perhaps appeared already, So. If you divide them all up, you can always find lesser characters to say, they sort of fit that prophecy. But the unique thing about Jesus is he brings them all together. So,
yeah, that's correct. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Joseph. Anything, Barbara?
Do you think Matthew is trying to draw a contrast between the blind men recognizing him and the leaders in Jerusalem not recognizing him?
I actually think that the way Matthew's gospel goes is a really good question, because it's one of those things I forgot to kind of draw out. We've highlighted a little bit how there's been a run through Matthew of we see Jesus and then we get it wrong. We see Jesus and we get it wrong. And as we kind of get to the end of that process, even those who probably can't physically see Jesus are seeing Jesus, if that makes sense. So I think the contrast is almost, because as we go forward, yes, then there are going to be those who are sophisticated and who should see Jesus and who don't. But equally, I think, as what we've just gone through, you've got to become like a child to see the kingdom. You're the Christ, the Son of the living God, but then get behind me, Satan, because you're wanting me to do things the way you see them rather than I do. So you get this kind of flow of a contrast through most of the period when Jesus has gone down to Judea, this kind of thing of high moments and then followed by a kind of low moment. We don't really get it. So the first has got to be last, but then suddenly, but when we're in your kingdom, we ought to sit next to you. And then we have to revisit, but the first is going to be last. And now here it is. Here is someone who's right at the bottom, but they're now seeing too. And I think whether it's Matthew or the Holy Spirit drawing out the contrast, I think the thing is it kind of is an interesting mix of, that we can all go through that up and down bit for a bit, but equally sometimes the person who really doesn't have a chance of understanding, because they can't see to read the scriptures for themselves, they can't see what's going on, they've only heard it secondhand, but something in their spirit's got hold of something. I think there is definitely something of that that nature. But I suspect it goes both ways. It goes backwards to what we've just covered, as well as forward to those who don't want to.
Oh, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that the blind men should know, to call him Son of David, and that they have got that perception that,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe they've heard stories somewhere of Jesus healing the blind, and they've been waiting for their chance. And I mean, because there's obviously a desperation that comes out, the crowd are telling them to be quiet, and they just carry on even louder.
Yeah. No. I think that, that's the thing, is I definitely think that's why I kind of like the idea that there's one there to start with, who starts it off and actually finds a friend, which is why you get the contrast between whether you report one or two. Because one of the things I often flag is when you tell real stories, if you can't clarify with the witness, you almost always have this situation where, well, what did you mean by that? and I think, if you can clarify, that's great. But here we can't ask them. So but one of the common things is, when we read a story, our minds naturally squeeze it up to make it as small as possible. It's our first instinct is we make the story fit just the facts we've got. And the reality is most stories have far more things going on in them. And one of the key things is, when does a story start and when does it finish? And we use this a lot. I use it a lot as an illustration when we're actually looking at the accounts of of Jesus' last week. So I can give you plenty of examples from that period, as we're going to come to. So talks about Jesus arrives in Bethany, and then it says, and while he was there, they had a meal for him. So in our heads, we squeeze that to he arrives and goes straight into a meal. And then we suddenly discover that doesn't quite fit with some of the other Gospels, but it never actually just says that. It's just he's arrived, and while they're there, there's a meal. Why do I tell you about the meal up front, even though it doesn't actually happen for a few days? Well, because it introduces to us some of the themes, because Lazarus is there. And then we hear later that it's because Lazarus is with Jesus that people are really interested to see and know about him, because they've heard the story and they want to. So it makes sense to bring in Lazarus early on, even though the meal with Lazarus doesn't take place for a couple of days, as you try and fit them all together. That's what, or the withering of the fig tree. So that Jesus passes it one day and says, and curses it, and actually it's the next day that it's withered. But in Matthew's gospel, he just tells us Jesus cursed it and it withered immediately. So because we're modern people, we think immediately means instant, whereas all he means is it died at that point, and by the next day we recognize it. So that if we try to be, if we only accept, if you like, the way we shorten the story down, we end up creating contradictions. And that's what I was trying to illustrate, I think, with this issue of, I think there's probably a day or so around Jerusalem, because we've got these various things that seem to come together around that moment, at which point you get that sorry, I've forgotten where we started now, that sense of Jesus coming in, someone starting to call out, and actually probably then there's two of them by the end of it. And so do we tell the story as Jesus leaves, or do we start it when he arrives? So if because actually that story probably started before Jesus met Zacchaeus but finished afterwards. So which event should you put first? So he arrives, and Bartimaeus understands who it is, starts calling out, gathers his friend, and by the time Jesus is moving, they're really desperate because they can't miss the opportunity. They may not run into him again. They've heard the testimonies, they know the stories, they believe with faith the best of it, and it concludes after Jesus is lodged with Zacchaeus. But in Luke's telling, it seems like it all happened before. And whereas in Matthew's telling, it seems right at the end, because the final moment happened at the end, but the first moment happened as they arrived. hopefully that makes sense, because I think having, as someone who's tried to work out some of the interplay in the Gospels, is that's a really important principle. And I've tried to illustrate it. If you have if you meet people in a crowd, you might see someone and you go and start talking to them, and then they say, "Oh, you should meet so and so." So they introduce me to so and so. And then I'm talking a bit with so-and-so, and then the person who introduced us originally leaves. Now, when I'm reporting it back, when do I say it happens? Did the story start when I first met my friend? Or did it start when they brought the third party in and we had a conversation together? When did it end? Did it end when one of the three people who were in the conversation first left? Or did it finish when the final two stopped talking? And, depending on which choice you make, if you're going to tell a story, you have to choose one of those points. But there's always, if someone clarifies, you could say, well, no, so-and-so had already left. So it was only now just the two of us. And that may seem like a small, trivial thing, but it makes you realise when life happens in reality, in a big crowd, it's never as linear as when you tell the story. And just the nature of trying to tell a story means you have to put a marker down here and a marker down there. And it's not complicated to imagine a way in which all of the things you say can be true, but we often have to imagine something that is beyond what I've been told to make sense of it. So hopefully that sort of made sense in its own way.
Yes. Yeah.
Good. Well,
thank you.
Yeah, and even though we only had 6 verses or 5 verses, we've still got nearly the hour. Done nearly the hour. So I will say it was really nice of you to make it today. Thank you for being there, and we'll see you next week as we get into the Easter verses.
Yes, very good timing.
Yeah, it is. I know. I was thinking that. I was just thinking, I've actually got to do a fair amount of work before next week, because I've been working from some verses I drew together a while back, and I've done them at a slightly different format to the way I've historically done the Easter stories, the Easter narratives. So to make it fit, I've got to go and do a bit of work between now and next week.
Okay.
So bless you guys.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
See you next week.
See you next week.
Yeah.
Then. Bye.